My name is Tonya Weekly, and today we're going to do a little work along with our Moonlit Waterfall. This has been one of our most popular projects through the past year and a half, and it's going to be retired from the show circuit, but there's a lot of people that are going to love this that have not had the opportunity to see it. When we do this on the show circuit, now, let me see. I hope you can see this. This is the original, one of the original cards. I've done dozens of these. This is done on our semi-gloss cardstock, the Peddler's Den semi-gloss cardstock. I hope that you can see how smooth the ink lay is, okay? When we were doing it on the show circuit and we had to work very quickly, we reverted to using uncoated cardstock because it would dry so much faster. And hopefully you can see the difference. I know that these broadcasts don't do the best on fine detail. But look at the smooth ink lay here and look at the stippled texture here. That is the difference between using the coated cardstock and the uncoated cardstock. Now, all of the people that did this at the show, they loved it. They learned the technique. The only difference is that the ink lay and the texture is different. It's much smoother when you're working on the coated cardstock. With this work along, we're going to kind of explore a lot of different things, okay? So the first thing that you would do if you were making this is you would stamp the waterfall across the card. Now, I told you that we're using coated cardstock. This is the Peddler's Den 100-pound coated two sides white semi-gloss in case you go to the website and you want some. Once you've stamped this, you're going to be adding, and you know, if you notice here, I told you I've done dozens of these. Sometimes I use cattails, sometimes I use reeds, sometimes I use the pine bough, sometimes I use the bold branches. Some of the specifics like that, you can mix it up and change it depending on your preferences and depending on what you might have handy. But on this one, the only thing we masked was the waterfall because we wanted to keep it bright white while we did our stipple work. On this one, we masked across the top here so that we could tuck trees behind the boulders. Since we're not in any particular hurry today, we're going to look at doing something like this. So the first thing you would do is mask this so that you can tuck trees behind it. Now, here is the mask that I used on the last one I did. And you can see that when the first thing you do is you stamp it on your Eclipse tape, okay? And then when you cut it to use it to tuck objects behind, and I call this a scene building mask, you actually cut part of the image off. And I like showing people this because I like you to see how much I cut off. I didn't go across the whole thing because I'm only going to tuck trees over here. So we're going to reuse this mask. The nice thing about Eclipse tape is you can use it over and over and over again. And we're going to position it. Now, it doesn't do you any good to cut it properly if you don't position it properly. You want to put your mask on, and this one's a little easier to see because it has been used, and so you can see that edge better. Hopefully you can see that there is a gap between the mask and the stamped image that's on the card. I tell people you want to see that image peeking out, and you should see at least this much of it peeking out from underneath of the mask. This will enable you to put your stamps on there and not get a halo or a void between them. Now the stamp I'm going to be using is this pine tree, and it would be possible for it to extend down below the mask. Well, we don't want that. So I take a paper towel and lay across here just to protect the bottom part of my card. The black ink that we're using is the Memories Black. And we're going to ink this stamp Now remember, you're stamping on uncoated, or you're stamping on coated cardstock. Your ink must dry by evaporation, not absorption. So it's easy to over ink. I always ink my stamp and then I look to see if it's inked evenly. And then I'm going to put my first one tall here. And you always want to press firmly without rocking. When you're masking like this, you especially want to press firmly where the stamp crosses the mask. And there you have it. Now we're going to put some more trees there. So we're going to ink it up again. And sometimes I put 2 and sometimes I put 3, and you know, just kind of depends. I'm going to put this one slightly overlapping the first one and shorter. And I'm going to press, and again, especially where that stamp crosses over the mask. There we have 2 trees. I think for the purposes of this one, I'm going to stop there. Now, working on the foreground, see, I'm going to remove this mask, and I am going to put it back on here because I can reuse this many, many more times. We sell the Eclipse tape. It looks like this when you buy it. This, if you're careful with it and you don't waste it, this roll will last you for years. We're very careful with it. We don't waste it. We reuse our masks, and it lasts a very long time, even though we use it for a lot of teaching. Now, if you look at the original, this one had 3 trees up here, but then I have some trees here and here. So we're going to use this same tree, and we're going to ink it up. And again, I always look to see if it's uniformly inked. And things are larger when they're closer to you. So this tree is going to be big. And there it is. Now let's add another shorter one. Now see, when I do this, you don't want them to look like little soldiers lined up in a row. You want them to kind of overlap. You want them to be different heights. So I'm going to put another one here. It's overlapping the first one slightly. And there we have it. We're going to put one over here. There we go. Now, I'm going to make a comment here. We're using our red rubber stamps. Hey, Sandy, let me see. What is the name of the tree stamp you are using? We have a variety of these. This one is actually only available in 2 of our sets. It's available in the Rocky Mountain set, which is a big set. And then we have a second set. I don't remember the name of it, but it has this tree and it has one of our bears. And I think it has either reeds or cattails. I think cattails in it. Get a hold of me later and I can give you the exact number of it. Our stamps are just plain red rubber. They come to you like this. And you do the final trim, and you need to have a means of attaching them to either your acrylic blocks or your platform if you use a MISTI or something like that. We are using Grip It, which is our signature product. It is a transparent mounting mat. Hopefully you can see this. You can see that it's pretty thick. It's about the same thickness as cling foam. So it gives you some cushion. When you use it in your MISTI, it will take up the same space as cling foam. So if you're used to using cling foam, this replaces it. This is portable. So you can put it on your block, you can take it off your block and store it. You can put it in your MISTI, you can take it out of your MISTI. The only thing about this is when it gets dirty, it'll begin to drop stamps, and at that point you need to clean it with the ink remover and Grip It cleaner from Peddler's Den. Okay, so that was our little commercial. I am going to set this aside. Now, on this one, we used a pine branch in this corner. On this one, we used our bold branches, and we put some actually in both corners. Like I said, every time I do this, I get very bored doing the same thing over and over. So every time I do this, I switch something up a little bit. And you can too. That's part of the fun of scenic stamping. Today we're going to use the pine bough. So I'm going to grab the pine bough and I'm going to ink it up. This is part of a set. You get a variety of pine boughs and pine cones. And it's really handy. So I'm going to stamp. Now, you know, pine boughs aren't like hardwoods where, you know, they don't go up and they don't go down. And they do a little bit, but not as much. So I'm always kind of careful about the way I stamp them. Now, we want to bring this down a little bit more, so I'm going to ink it again. And I got some ink on the edge there. Try to wipe that away. And we're going to put some right here. Awesome. All righty. Now, to trim out the foreground, on this one we used reeds. On this one we used cattails. On this one we used cattails. You know, you can use whatever you want, but you do need to trim out that foreground a little bit. So today we're going to use reeds. And if you purchase the kit that is advertised here in the flash sale group, you will get one of the red rubber reeds as part of the kit. Again, I ink it and I examine it to make sure that it is inked uniformly. And on some of these finer images, it's a little harder to tell. Now I'm going to overlap my tree. And here's another tip. When you're using a block that is much bigger than your stamp, it's best to position that stamp in the middle. It's really hard not to rock, and it's really hard not to get some of the other stuff. It's really hard to keep that off of your paper if you put it on one end or the other. Putting it in the middle is always going to give you the best balance, which is going to give you the best results. Now, again, we don't want these to look like little soldiers marching across the front. So we're going to change the heights, and we're going to even change the angle a little bit. So I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to actually overlap them. The two images are overlapping. And that makes it look like a thicker cluster, and it gives it a little more natural profile. Oops. See, the bottom of this is getting a little dry. Alrighty. We're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to overlap the trees. And we're going to add a few more here. Each time this is a little different, but this thins out where the water flow would be. This would suggest that, you know, over here is either maybe a swampy or a dirt, but the main water flow is coming right down here. So we're thinning out our reeds right here in the middle on both of them. I think I could use a little more over here because this would be the natural flow of the water. But this compositional choices falls under the category of artist interpretation. And any of you who have sat through any of my classes know that I am big on artist interpretation. I think that's fine. Alrighty. Now, let's take a quick look and see if I've got all my components in here, because when I am teaching live, it's easy to miss something. I believe that this is our basic composition. Now, we have stamped on the coated cardstock, and I doubt that you can see this, but I'm going to try to show you anyway. As I rotate, can you see puddles of wet ink? You may not be able to see them, but they are there. And this is because this paper dries by evaporation. So to keep things moving, I have stamped a second one and let it dry. So we're going to set this aside so that we can keep moving. This one was stamped about an hour ago. Yeah, maybe 45 minutes. I can see it's not totally dry here, but I believe it's dry enough for us to continue to work with. When you use this paper at home, you must remember this. Yeah, I'm not sure what you were saying no to, Sandy. I'm sorry. When you're working at home, you must remember this, and it's really important to have the time to set your basic compositions aside and let them dry completely before you begin to blend or drag ink. Stippling is a little more forgiving. If you're blending and dragging ink, anything that hasn't completely evaporated, completely dry, is likely to smear. So you must, yeah, I didn't think you could see those puddles of ink. I thought it was worth trying. You'll just have to take my word that they're there. Okay, because we're going to be stippling and not dragging and blending, I believe this is probably dry enough for us to move on. Now, earlier we talked about the Eclipse tape, which in my opinion is the best masking material on the market. This is on our website. It comes in a roll. I always open it up, and if I'm stamping, I'll put it on my table. I don't press it down hard, just very lightly, and I'll do my stamps and what have you. And a lot of times I'll only use a piece over here, and I'll actually cut that out so that I don't waste any of this. Now, for my moons, they're also made of Eclipse tape. What I do for my moons is I put cardstock, strips of cardstock on the Eclipse tape, and then I take a hand punch and I punch them out. I always try to punch across a split, which makes it very easy to peel the cardstock off and have your moon, or anything else that you may want to punch. When I position my moons, I really like to have some branches silhouetted in front of the moon. So you'll notice that on pretty much all of mine, there's always going to be branches silhouetted. To do that, you just have to position your moon across your branches. Now, today, I'm just above the rock here, which means I'm actually extending off the paper, and that's fine. Sometimes I use bigger moons, sometimes I use little moons. It really doesn't matter, within reason. Now, earlier I talked about at the shows, we just masked the Waterfall because we wanted this to be nice and white, and we had to keep things moving. So we were using only 2 colors of ink. When I get crazy perfect on these things, I would use 4 colors of ink. I would use a light, medium, and dark blue and black. But at the shows, we used only the dark blue and the black. And they look nice, okay? So to cut the mask for the Waterfall, this is a little bit dicey because this is not a straight line. This is water splashing and foaming. And this is really challenging. So when we cut the masks for this, we cut off the side, we cut off this one, and because this is going to be a color mask, not a mask where you're actually going to tuck something behind. We consider this a scene building mask. This is a color mask. The difference is on this one, you have to have that gap. You have to cut part of the image off and position it low. When you're using it as a color mask, you want to cut right on this line, and you want to position it right on this line, because you don't want the blue ink going down on the water, and you don't want a white border above it. Now, because of the bubbling, gurgling, foaming water, you can't just cut it straight across. Sometimes in a case like that, I would try to actually tear it. But in this case, I actually tried to cut at the base of where the lines for the water going straight down are above the gurgling, bubbling water. So we're going to take this piece and we're going to position it, and this is a precise position. More precise than the other one. And I see that my mask is not absolutely perfect. It's really close. We're going to go with it. All right. So for the purposes of this work along, this is what we're going to do before we begin our stippling. Now I can see I have wet ink here, and I have a few little puddles, even though it's been drying for a long time. To try to hasten this up, I'm holding this paper towel. I'm not letting the paper towel move. I'm trying to blot any ink that is still wet, and I'm really not getting any, so it's not really wet enough to blot it. But I'm going to do this anyway, just in case there's a puddle big enough to blot. You can't rub on the paper. You have to hold the paper towel absolutely still. And I really didn't pick up any ink, so it's not that wet. When I talk about using stipple brushes, this is what the stipple brushes look like. Unfortunately, there are many, many brushes on the market that are being marketed as stipple brushes that won't work for this technique. We sell two different brands. We sell the airbrush from Germany. They have these beautiful finished handles, and they have a higher quality bristle. These brushes are somewhat expensive, depending on what you're looking for. This is a quality that fine artists will use. We also sell the craft version. Yeah, I've got mine marked here. Not all the handles say this. We also sell this craft version. You can see that, the brush is a little cockeyed, and the handle is, nothing like this. The bristles, I think, are probably the same quality of bristle, but they're not attached as well. These bristles will shed a lot, which is annoying. But we sell these because they're really affordable, and they work really well for the majority of crafters. So we don't sell a lot of these to crafters. We actually sell this to fine artists, but crafters, of course, can buy them on our website as well. My favorite size is 6. This is a size 6. I always recommend that you use the slightly bigger size for whatever ink you're going to use for the mask coverage. And then I'll drop down to a size 4 and sometimes even a 2, although I rarely use 2s. I'll drop down to a size 4 for something that I'm only going to use a little of. So on this one, we're only going to use a little black. So we'll be using a smaller one for the black. So we're going to start out with the larger one. And we're going to start out with our medium blue. I don't want to move this out of the range of the camera. I guess I'm still in. And to get started, when the bristles are not wet, a lot of times I'll gently, emphasis on gently, swirl this. I either tap gently or I swirl gently. I tell people, do not stab your pads. If you stab your pad, you don't pick up any more ink, but you do shorten the life of your bristles. So gently swirl or tap to pick up ink. I like to start from the outside, and I'll get some ink down, and then I like to tap and swirl, and then I go back to my pad, pick up a little more ink, and I'll tap and I'll swirl. And because we're working on coated cardstock, as you swirl, the ink is not dry because it dries by evaporation, and it will allow you, when you swirl, to smooth the stipple brush marks out. So we are tapping and then swirling. And go back to the ink pad and tap and swirl. Now, we have a mask on our waterfall, so we don't have to worry about ink getting on the waterfall. And I always like to have a little bit of a glow from the moonlight around the moon. So I always like to keep right around the perimeter of the moon a little bit lighter than some of the outer areas. So now you see me doing a lot more swirling because I'm smoothing out that ink lay. We're kind of getting rid of those brush marks. And hopefully you can see how smooth that already looks. Again, I'm never sure about the reflection on the light. Hopefully you can see that it's a very smooth ink lay. Now, this is a monochromatic scene, so we're going to use blue all over it. So we're going to come down and we're going to continue to tap and swirl. I'm really wary about down here because I can still see some wet ink. So I'm going to purposely do less swirling down here. A little bit less. I got to do some. I'll try to brush this way so that if it smears down on itself. Now we do want to come into the water some. But we still want to have a highlight in that water. Hopefully you can see this developing. Now at this point, I'm going to give you a sneak peek. See what's happening here? Now I got to get that positioned right back on there. Okay, there we go. Okay, now I'm going to switch to my dark blue ink. And again, we're going to tap and then do some swirling. And the edges are dark because they're the farthest away from the moonlight and they have the most obstacles that are kind of disrupting that moonlight. I have a very, very light touch here. Very, very light. Just like I tell people not to stab the pads, you don't want to stab the paper either. You want a very light touch. Light taps, light swirls. Hitting the paper or the pad harder doesn't put down more ink. All it does is shorten the life of your tools. can see how fast this technique is. It's interesting because we also do ink blending with our ovals and what have you. The stipple brush technique is a more beginner technique, and a lot of people don't like stippling because they don't like the texture. You know, they don't like seeing all these little dots. But what they don't understand is that if they work on coated cardstock, they can get rid of all of those little dots. Now we're gonna move to black. And I am using a smaller brush because we're going to use less of the black than the other colors, and so we can get by with a smaller brush. This is shedding a little bit because it's one of the cheaper brushes, but now the surface ink on this cardstock is still wet, which means that you can easily blend these inks. And if I want to get ink off my bristles, I do this, because right now I just want to blend. I don't want to add more. There we go. Can you see how we have the lightest here, fading into a little darker, and finally into the darkest? That's the goal. And it should be a gentle, graduated blend. And here, even though we're close to the moon, we need to get some darkness over here. We're trying to confine it so that we still have some light right at the moon, but we're going to get some dark over here too. We need that. Compositionally, we need that. We need that to create our contrast. Okay, I am going to peek underneath of the waterfall. Okay, see how we have that nice sharp line right along the waterfall? My concept is the moonlight is reflecting off right here. And of course, the farther it gets from the waterfall, the more tone that you get. So I'm going to put that back on, and I'm going to bring just a little more in from here. I don't think we need any more black. I'm going to go back to my lighter blue. And I'm going to bring a little more up. Ah, crap. The brush still had a lot in it. I'm trying to clean the brush out and just blend the ink, and it will work. I did accidentally get a little more ink than I intended, but I think I accomplished what I set out to. Okay, so let's see what we got right now. I'm going to pull this mask off. We're going to put it on our sheet of masks, though, so that we can save it for the next card. We're going to pull our waterfall off. We're going to save it. And for the most part, I'm happy with that. I'm not 100% happy with this. Because the ink stays wet, you can take a dry brush and you can go back and you can move that ink around for quite a while. Okay, so you see bright white fading into the light blue, fading into the darker as it gets farther away from the light source. This is a little more black because I want that to fade down a little bit darker. Okay, not bad. Let's see. Let me put a fresh piece of white under it so you can see a little better. All right. Now, we're going to come back and we're going to look at this one. Obviously, the blues are slightly different, but I want you to see some of the things that I do for detailing. A lot of times I have lost any kind of highlights or details through here. So if you look, I have taken a white gel pen and I have very carefully reinserted some highlights. Can you see that? Sandy, you're on there. Can you see those highlights that I did in white gel pen? Yeah, it says my connection is slow. Hopefully you can see the gel pen work here. I've put some highlights on the rocks because that would be reflecting. Good, thanks Sandy. That would be reflecting off of the rocks here, but maybe not over here. I've got some here again because there'd be light reflecting off of the rocks, but not back here. If I manage to screw up and lose my highlights in my water, you can go back and add a few with the white gel pen. And I said I didn't get the water quite the way I want it. So we're gonna attempt to put some little highlights in here. Now the nice thing about this is if you don't like it, you can take it back off. And I have these pens in, and this is the big one, this is the 10. The 8 or the 5 would actually make this easier because they would be a finer line. Because I just want some little lines and dots. You know, I don't want it to be too much. That's kind of heavy. I'm going to break that up a little bit. Come up here and get a few highlights on the rocks. This would be easier and a little more effective if I was using my smaller tip pen. But I'm not going to take the time to go look for it. We're going to make do with what we've got here. Ah, that's too heavy. There we go. If you really screw up with these gel pens on this coated cardstock, wait until it completely dries and you can actually scratch it off. Oh, let's see, let's put a few highlights here. That's a little much. Might get some on this boulder. Yeah, the pen work on the one I showed you before, the pen work on this one is a little bit better. But one of the things about this pen work is that after it dries, this white gel pen will kind of, I don't know, it must liquefy a little bit of the ink under it because after it's completely dry, it seems to mute it down a little bit, which is good because it many times can use muting down a little bit. No, I'm not crazy about them, so I'm going to take them off. See how easy that was? Yeah, by using the side of it and dragging it a little bit, I can lighten that up and I can get a little more of what I want. So I'm going to take that one off. There we go. Yeah, let's see if we can improve on these a little bit. You've heard me and every other artist say, there aren't many things that can't be fixed. this semi-gloss paper makes this particular technique super easy to fix. Now we don't want to get back in here because that's the real deep shadows. Yeah, even those are a little heavy. I'm not crazy about them. Let's get rid of them. See, it's almost like erasing. Of course, it helps if you have a fingernail. I like that a little bit better. Still not happy with this. There we go. Just blot that away a little bit. Maybe break this up a little bit. All right, that's not bad. All right, what do you think? You know, the two of these are different, but in both cases, we used a different ink up here. In both cases, you know, you're fading from your brights into your darks, and you have a smooth ink lay, whereas on the uncoated cardstock, you have the textured, coarse ink lay. All right, so I think that's a wrap for today.